Well, I think it's time for us to get started. So, anyway, this is Open Sourcing Mental Illness. My name is Ed Finkler, and this is OSCON 2014, if you didn't know where you are. Some people call me Funkatron, so you can find me at URLs and usernames of that nature usually. I work for a company called Fictive Kin. That is a company that I work for, and that is all you need to know about that. So who am I? Well, you know, I'm a father and I'm a husband and I'm a developer type person, and occasionally I write music, and I'm kind of a big nerd. I do, you know, get really like movies and really like TV shows and stuff like that. So, and I also have a mental disorder, or I guess really a couple that I've kind of been diagnosed with. Now, I'm just coming here as a person. I'm not I have little or no training in this stuff. I'm not a trained psychologist or therapist or, you know, a medical doctor. I have none of that stuff. So I want to throw all this stuff out with that caveat, because I think it's important to understand that the people who are professionally trained are the ones who should be giving advice, and not necessarily people like me. So I'm going to try to avoid giving you advice about, say, treating mental disorders and things like that. That's not my role. I'm not a plumber, but I do use the toilet, and it's kind of like that. So I guess what I'm here to do is to talk about what it's like to have a mental illness or mental disorder from my perspective, and then also to kind of bring some of the some information about the impact of psychiatric issues, of mental health issues, to raise awareness about that, and to think about those kind of things in the context of our happiness, our productivity, and the kind of workplace environments that we have. So I'm going to do a little quick informal survey here. Now, I'm going to judge based on the fact that a number of you have glasses, and I bet there's more of you who are tricking us and wearing contacts, that some of us have deficiencies with our eyesight. I'm curious, is there anyone here who would feel uncomfortable telling somebody that they have, let's call it an eye disorder? Anybody here? No, I wear glasses, that's normal, and we all are comfortable with that. We're all comfortable with the idea that there are many people, in fact, maybe most of us, who have to wear these kinds of things so that they can cope with society, so they can be productive, so they can get things done, and we use these kinds of things as a treatment for that, and that's just something that we do, and we're all accept that, and we're all comfortable with that. Now, I'm curious, how many of you would be afraid to, say, tell somebody about, to talk about something where you or a loved one who's close to you, something like that, had diabetes? Like, would be comfortable talking about that with, say, a coworker? So a couple people will be comfortable with that, you know, kind of iffy. All right, so yeah, right, okay, so we got you that. Now, how about something like cancer, which is pretty scary? Some people kind of meet moderately, but you know, it kind of depends on the person a little bit. But it's not something that there's like a huge stigma about, that you think that, oh, well, that person obviously did something evil, and that's why they have cancer, or something of that nature. You know, for what it's worth, both my dad and my brother have diabetes. My brother also has cancer, and those are things that I've had to deal with, and kind of, to some extent, about thinking about those kinds of stuff. Now, I'm curious, though, you know, you don't have to say you have one or anything like that, or you're diagnosed, or you suspect, or whatever. I'm curious about how many of you would feel comfortable talking to your boss or your manager, or that kind of thing, about a mental health issue that you were dealing with. So how many of you? Right, it really helps me if you raise your hand super high, because I'm kind of blinded by these lights. So like 4 or 5 out of, what do we got here, maybe 25, 30 people. That's a pretty low percentage. How about with a colleague, somebody that you work directly with, who didn't oversee you and, say, controls your future like a puppet master, somebody who just... Now, would you be more likely to talk about something like that? Maybe a few more of you would be able to talk about that? Okay. Or a friend or family member? I'm just curious. Please raise your hands up pretty high. So a lot of you would be willing to do that. My experience has been that it is at best 50% in most of the times that I've seen that, and I'm glad to see that at least talking with a family member, you'd be willing to discuss that kind of thing. But I think it's interesting when thinking about that, when thinking about what we describe as mental health issues or mental disorders, about how we treat those differently than other illnesses, than other disorders, than other health issues, and why we do that. And I think it's something to think about a little bit as we're talking about this stuff. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how these kinds of things affect us. And affects us, when I say us, I really do mean as a community, as a culture, the ways that we deal with this and the impact of mental health disorders across our culture. Interesting things is that 1 in 5 adults will have a mental disorder, deal with a mental disorder in any given year in the U.S. Now, I think that, so that, and I believe the numbers are similar in other similar societies. European societies tend to be similar to that. Canada tends to be like, I almost said Canada. Canada tends to be like that. To 1 in 5, we're talking about 20%. That's an enormous number of people who are dealing with this category of illness. And of those, anxiety disorders are the most common. You tend to see what they call comorbidity, too, that you'll see someone who has, say, an anxiety disorder also deals with depression. They'll be diagnosed with more than one thing at the same time. The level of disability, and I think this is kind of an interesting idea, because I think oftentimes it's difficult for people, whether they may themselves be dealing with a mental disorder, a mental health issue, the idea that it's not really debilitating. Well, in fact, I think there's there's good comparison to be made that say if you have something like moderate depression, that the level of disability in terms of the impact that it has on your ability to be productive, your ability to get around, that kind of thing, that's similar to the level that you have with something like multiple sclerosis or severe asthma. Things like that. It has an actual impact on your physical life. It is not just something that's happening in your brain. It is somehow independent of anything else. Now, severe depression is similar to that of quadriplegia in the way that it impacts your ability to do be productive in society, do the things that you would normally do, act out the way that you want to behave and do the things you want to do. It can be enormously incapacitating. There's an idea of disease burden, and that's something that came up in this World Health Organization study that was released in 2004 called The Global Burden of Disease. And basically the idea is that's the amount of premature death associated with something plus years lived with a disability and how the impact that has. Different disorders might not kill you quickly, but they may impact your ability to perform in a way that, say, average people behave normally with, or something like that. So that's premature death plus years lived with disability. Now, in adding that up, the burden of mental disorders is the largest disorder category in North America. It was higher than cardiovascular disease, it's higher than cancer, it's higher than everything else. Now, the premature death levels are significantly lower than anything else. The years lived with disability and its impact on your, what you do in your life and what you're able to do in your life is significantly higher than anything else. So if you add those things up, mental disorders are the largest of those categories, cause the most disease burden in a society, in North America, that is. So there's a quote from that study. In all regions, neuropsychiatric conditions are the most important causes of disability, accounting for around 1/3 of years lost to disability among adults aged 15 years and over. So I just want you to just think about that and think about that level of impact that it has in our society, that level of impact that it has on our ability to do work, to be productive, to be happy. I want to talk a little bit about myself and sort of my own experiences with this and the diagnoses that I've had. I have generalized anxiety disorder, and depression is part of that for me. So generalized anxiety disorder, the idea generally being is that that you have a heightened level of anxiety and it is not specific necessarily to something in particular. I have a bunch of different things that kind of trigger me. Like, for example, I don't actually get frightened of flying, but I tend to get freaked out by the planning that goes into that and the fear that I'm going to forget to do something, to bring a document to the airport, all the things like that. I don't like to ride public transportation because I get freaked out that I don't know what I'm going to do and that I'm going to embarrass myself. Things of that nature. So I have a bunch of different things that are like that. I also have adult ADD. That's something that a challenge that I have, that I deal with. Pretty sure I had childhood ADD, but it was not diagnosed until I was an adult, so now it's adult ADD. I take medication every day. The medications that I take for mental health stuff, I take Lexapro, I take Buspar, I take Strattera, I take Klonopin. I take all of those things. If you're really curious, I can sit down and talk to you about what each one of these does. But I take 4 different pills every day, and I take Buspar twice a day, so I have to take that at night too. So when I get up in the morning, I take those, and at night I take another one of those, and that's what I do every day. I also see a therapist about every 2 weeks. I've kind of gone on and off seeing a therapist. But I started seeing a therapist again, and she's trained in what they call cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT. The basic idea, what I do with her, is I talk about how and why I do the things that I do, how those things seem to impact the people around me, and I try to come up with strategies to address those things and figure out how I don't do those things anymore. That's what I get. That's what I get personally out of that therapy. I've been at other kinds of therapy and dealt with different kinds of things, but that's what I'm doing right now. Is I see a therapist every 2 weeks. Really helpful. Kind of like it. I was talking to somebody, and it's kind of like having a life coach, except they're not telling you how to run your career. It's just telling you how to live and be happy, which I kind of like that more. But so what it's like, and I think this is one of those things that we get into thinking about empathy a lot. And one of the important things here is that people with mental illnesses typically don't really present as sick. When I say that, I mean that if you look at somebody who maybe is having anxiety issues or suffers from depression or things like that, they don't look like it. They don't like, oh, dude, you've got measles, or you have open sores all over your body, or you look really bad, and things like that. Now, sometimes it is because mental disorders impact the physical world and our physical ability to do stuff. Otherwise, it wouldn't matter at all, would it? It would just be like something's happening in our head and magically is somehow disconnected from our physical being and have no impact on our bodies and how we live and stuff like that. Of course, that's not the case. Our psychological issues have a dramatic impact on and trigger our body to do different things. But the fact is that many of us don't present as though we're sick. So if you just look at the things that you just know sort of colloquially, what does a sick person look like? A lot of us aren't going to look sick. We might, so how do you identify that? And I think that's an interesting thing. So, in dealing with anxiety, for me, I think the big difference is that somebody described this as, a friend of mine said, I find the challenge to be explaining to folks how it's not like their anxiety about a job interview, which is kind of, has some anxiety about it, or like about Mondays. It's like, I really don't want to go to work. I'm a little nervous about that kind of thing. But that the level of it is heightened to the point, and this really gets into the definition of a disorder. It's heightened to the point where it impacts what you do and how your ability to do things. So, like I was talking about, my anxiety is such that I have had many times where I have said to myself, I will not go to this place over here. I'm here, especially because I speak at a lot of conferences. So I'm at a hotel here, and I'll go to this place, and it's like, hey, you should go meet us over here, which is 2 miles away. And I will not go because I am too afraid to, because of all the mental challenges, all the time that I'm thinking about, like, how do I get from here to here, and what process do I take, and stuff like that. And if it was like, oh, I got to take public transportation, I'm out. I just won't do it. And it manifests in a lot of different ways, but in general, it's for me, it's this very, very heightened fear that is along the lines of, there are times when it's appropriate to have these anxiety responses, these stress responses. Like if I was being attacked by a lion, that is an entirely appropriate time to have an anxiety response, and your adrenaline kicks in, you start sweating, and different things happen and stuff like that. But it's not appropriate to have that when I'm thinking about, like, oh, maybe I'll take a bus over and meet some people. That is not an appropriate thing, but that doesn't, the response that I'm having is I'm having to respond to inappropriate times, and that impacts my ability to function. And that would be the definition of a disorder. So I'm, like I said, I'm scared to go to new places, scared to get on a bus. I have a lot of fear about embarrassment, going to a place that I don't understand sort of the etiquette and the rules and stuff like that. That's a huge issue for me. A lot of times I have this really intense emotion that goes along with things. And oftentimes when it comes on really hard, I feel like I have to kind of ride it out. Like I can't, like, logically I know what choices I should make, but my emotions are overriding my ability to make decisions that are logical. And they push me to make decisions that aren't logical. And I actively know, consciously know that they're harmful. Like, I know that what I should do is maybe go take a break and sit down because I'm really upset about something or I'm really freaked out or something like that. Most of the time when my temper flares up or something like that, that's really driven by fear. That's almost always the case. But I've had cases where it's like, no, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I'm very conscious of this, and what I would rather do is I would rather take this thing in my hand and smash it on the ground, or I'd rather punch my fist through a window, or I'd rather kick a table over or something like that. Well, thankfully, that doesn't happen a lot, but I've had all of those things happen over the years. And I knew what I was doing, and I knew what I was doing was destructive, but I did it anyway. Because you get to a point where it's like this, it puts you in a different mind state, a different mental state, where the consequences, even though you're very aware of them, and that you'll be very unhappy when you come down off of this, that the consequences don't matter. And that's a bad place to be. It can make your best friends seem like enemies. And it can make everything you enjoy seem useless and empty and stupid. That happens a lot. Now I have problems focusing. I talked about adult ADD. That's kind of gotten better as I take some medication for that sort of thing. With the ADD, it used to be that I would have a week where I don't really get anything done, and now maybe it's like a day. So that's like a pretty good improvement, right? But I still have problems with that kind of thing. But that's an issue for me. Oftentimes have these kind of issues with spiraling chains of thought, where I construct, and I have an ability to construct negative outcomes very easily. So I spend a lot of time, if I'm not careful, I spend a lot of time in the future. I spend a lot of time thinking about what could happen or what will happen, what I think will happen. And particularly if there's certain stressors that come in that are potentially negative, but only potentially. It'll be something like, oh, I get a note that like the boss wants to talk to me on Monday, and it's like, I don't know, Friday night or something like that. He says, hey, on Monday morning, come and talk to me. That, I will construct an outcome at which we will be homeless. Like my family will we'll lose our house, I'm going to lose my job, everything's lost. And I'll go from there to there, and I will construct an outcome like that very quickly. And I have to actively tell myself, no, that is not going to happen. Catastrophizing the situation. I do that a lot. So it's really quick for me to go from here to here, really, really fast. I can do that really well. I'm awesome at it. So that's a tough thing. I tend to obsess on negative events. I talked about spending time in the future. I also spend a lot of time in the past. Spend a lot of time in the past thinking about things that went wrong. Conflict is something that's really upsetting for me, and even ones that are long in the past. I remember for years, and I'm talking like 10, 15 years afterwards, there was a spelling workbook that I had in third grade that we were supposed to work on over the course of the year. And I just didn't do it because I was really bad at like actually doing work. I was like kind of smart enough to be in like these gifted classes and stuff like that when I was in sixth grade, and I could get around. But actually doing work, I was not particularly good at. I had a lot of trouble focusing on it. Had a really hard time doing things I did not want to do at that time. And so I just didn't do this spelling workbook. And it was, and I remember being really freaked out about it. It's like the last week of school, and I was like, oh my God, what's going on? I'm in third grade. What's the big deal? Well, I ended up, and the teacher passed me and stuff. It wasn't like the end of the world. I got like a C in spelling or something like that. But I had nightmares about that for years afterwards. Felt shitty about it for years afterwards anytime I would think of it. I felt really, really awful about it. I have a lot of trouble of letting go of pain and hurt from the past. And even like seeing a person's name can trigger me pretty badly, like can kind of ruin me for a little bit. And I've gotten better. It used to ruin my whole day sometimes. Now it's kind of better most of the time. It's only ruins me for 10 minutes or something like that. But that's something that I have a lot of trouble with. And I think at the end of the day, the thing that's toughest about this stuff, and whether, you know, how the issue, whatever my particular anxieties are and how they manifest and things like that, the idea of that you feel alone and you feel like you're not like anybody else and that nobody else is like you and nobody really understands you, that's a feeling that I had for a lot of my life. I distinctly had that feeling, probably from 7th grade for many years. And I actually, you know, it goes back kind of longer, but a lot of my childhood kind of trauma and bullying and stuff happened when I was in junior high. And the worst feeling in the world, and it went through high school, and it kept going and kept going. I mean, so it's only kind of recently where I've sort of started to feel like maybe I'm not alone, is that idea of feeling alone and unlike anyone else, and feeling that you're broken and that you're not right, that you're never going to be right, that fundamentally you cannot cope in this society, and that people act like this and you act like this. And every time that you kind of think things are going normally, you do something that fucks it up. And it breaks down, and that thing is trash. And that happens all the time. It happens over and over and over. That feeling of being disconnected and just not being like other people and not feeling like you have people around you who understand that loneliness is absolutely crushing. And I don't get into it a lot here, but I used to in earlier versions of this talk, that feeling of loneliness and isolation within a social structure, there's some good studies on there that has at least a decent correlation between that kind of thing and dying faster. Not just being unhappy, but physically impacting your immune system and stuff like that. That feeling of isolation, that you can be in a room with 100 other people and feel completely alone. Even if they're your friends, even if they're people that you know, you don't really feel like you connect to them. And that has a severe impact, not just on our psychology, but our psychology has a directly, related to our physical well-being and how our physical processes work. And so, as a consequence, that has a direct impact on our quality of life. So, and I've had suicidal thoughts, and I've done things like self-mutilation. They're kind of different things. I've done things like self-mutilation. Most of the time, for me, it was kind of an attempt to get people to understand how I felt, because I didn't know how to express it any other way, because I felt like I couldn't explain it. I couldn't explain how intense it was. I couldn't explain how I felt inside. That was really tough. For me, real suicidal actions, I've had what they call ideation, thinking about things, thinking about, that kind of stuff. I've done that a lot, and I tend to do that when I feel really, really shitty about myself. I've only a couple times I felt like come close to doing that or having real suicidal actions. They've only happened in really intense emotional situations, and they tend to be places where I was under an extreme amount of stress, like I was a huge fight with a loved one or a partner, things like that, and stuff got really bad. And that stuff really sucks, and I don't know what else to say about that. It's a tough thing, man. It's really tough, and you feel really shitty, and you kind of don't know where to go from there. And it's kind of demoralizing. But I think the thing is, if you're familiar with the AIDS, the advocacy for HIV and AIDS, especially in the 1980s, ACT UP New York had this phrase, silence equals death. And even though, if you talk about, actual morbidity levels of mental disorders, that they're much lower than you see with HIV, I think it's the same kind of thing. And that let's see, in North America, 20% of us are suffering from a mental disorder, and most of us are not getting treatment. Most of us are scared to talk about it. Most of us are hiding or shamed or fearful. And that's the kind of stuff that divides us and disconnects us. That's the stuff that makes us feel isolated. I know that is why I felt isolated, because we never talked about that shit. Didn't talk about it in my family, didn't talk about it in school, didn't talk about it in work. Nobody talked about that stuff. So I never thought I was really okay, and there were a lot of people like me. I never realized that. So in that sense, if we're quiet about it, we're all complicit in that suffering. We're all complicit in that. And that's a tough thing to hear, and it sucks, but it's true that if we don't talk about this stuff, that if we don't talk about how we're feeling, that it's okay to feel this way, that it's not a thing where you're just a lazy bastard or something like that, that you're just not trying hard enough, that's the kind of thinking that drives people to not want to talk about this. And that's why people suffer in shame and silence. And I don't want that to happen anymore. So as a developer, there's some interesting things. You know, I'm a developer. I've been doing web development for a long time. That's a long time. That's it. So it's funny. I'm really good at like quickly pattern matching stuff, and I tend to take things that like I'm not necessarily like a great new idea person, but I am good at coming up, seeing like how other people solve problems or seeing other things and then taking that and saying, oh, we can apply this here, and I'm good at that. I'm really good at anticipating potential outcomes quickly, particularly negative ones, surprisingly. And so, so that tends to make me kind of good at anticipating things like bad user interactions or malicious user interactions and how they might impact applications and things like that. I tend to be pretty good at that. Yes, writing test cases. Yes, it intimidates me sometimes to write tests because I'm like, well, what about I've just came up with 20 different things that could go wrong with this, and I don't want to write all that code. And one thing I think that I've gotten pretty good at, and this is, you know, and I think at least in part because I felt like I've dealt with a lot of this stuff, is being an empathetic and a supportive colleague. I know what it feels like to be kind of to feel like people don't understand you, and so I think I do a pretty decent job of listening non-judgmentally and trying to help people with those kinds of things, and I get a lot of reward out of helping others, and that makes me feel good. And I think a thing that's, you know, empathy to users too is something that goes into that a lot. Empathy, I think, is the most important skill you can practice no matter what you do. But it is most of the tools that we make, people actually interact with them in one way or another. At the end of the day, there are human beings who are interacting with them, and a lot of times there's a major disconnect between what a developer has in mind and what the user actually does. And I think trying to be empathetic to what the developer is doing, that's a skill that you have to practice, and I think I'm okay at that. I'm not bad at that. One of the interesting things I think as developers that I'm still challenging with, I'm still thinking about, is how we do that in an interview process for getting a new job. Like, I'm curious about how many of you would bring up, if you had a mental illness or mental health issue, would you bring that up in an interview? No. You wouldn't, because you'd think that you probably wouldn't get the job because it would appear to be a burden. Now, if you were in a wheelchair or something that was presented as sick, if you were or disabled in some way, if you were presented as in a way that was acceptable and it was easy to see, well, why didn't that guy get the job? Well, you know, you obviously were, you know, well, what's the word? Anyway, there's rules about that. There's laws about that kind of stuff that you can't discriminate against people for those kind of things. But it's very, very difficult to prove those kind of things. And it is the case that a lot of people probably won't hire you because of that stuff. And, you know, one of the things I was talking with somebody about is how do you bring this up indirectly? You might do some things like, you might ask, like, well, how often do you work late? Or what about working from home? Do you guys allow that sometimes, or things like that? And those are the kind of things that you can kind of get at least an indication of, like, how some flexibility in that. Ultimately, though, I think those are Band-Aids on what is a bigger cultural issue of, oh, well, if I start bringing up mental health, you're going to be a problem and you're not going to get your work done, so I'm not going to hire you because you're going to be a hassle. So I've been lucky that for the most part I've had managers, I've had bosses, I've had people who are generally understanding of things, and they have, you know, it hasn't always been, actually I should take that back. They haven't necessarily been understanding, because I think understanding is a little different. I think they've tried to be empathetic and tried to accommodate me, and I think that's been really helpful, and that has made an enormous difference in my quality of life. How many of you here manage anybody, or... Yeah, a lot of you. Well, I'm going to talk to you in a minute. That made an enormous difference in my life. in my quality of life is having people who were willing to listen to me and did not judge me and thought that I was still an okay person and was able to be productive despite the fact that I have this illness. So I got about 10 minutes left. I wanted to talk a little bit about that, and a lot of this goes up to those folks who were managing, so keep this in mind. Jump back to this for a second. Some of this has to do with thinking about stuff from a financial standpoint and productivity in your workers. And ultimately, I think that that's how you're going to sell a lot of people on this stuff, as opposed to just being a good human being. Because unfortunately, oftentimes corporations don't respond to the idea of being a good human being, even though they're supposedly people. That's not really how they work. But sick workers don't work, or they're significantly less productive in one way or another. So I'm just going to assume that's the case. There are some people, but in general, if you are ill with something, you do not work to the same level, whatever that thing may be. What we talked about is that 20% of people in North America dealing with a mental disorder any given year. So in your workplace, that's a safe assumption, that you have at least that many. And probably most of them are afraid to tell you, you bosses and managers. They're afraid to talk to you about it. 41%. Only 41% of people in the U.S. last year with a mental disorder received professional help. That's a really, really shitty number. That is a terrible number. So we got 60% of them who haven't sought any professional help, oftentimes because they're afraid to, oftentimes because they don't know what resources are available to them, oftentimes because they feel like maybe they're just being lazy and they have to push through it or something like that. 8 years. 8 years. Half the people who seek help for depression wait 8 years or more. And the longer they delay it, the more difficult the recovery is. So I want you to think about that. Think about the people that you work with. Think about that they don't necessarily present as sick. Some of them are suffering from mental disorders. And they're scared to talk about it because they don't think their workplace is safe. They think that there are going to be significant consequences to their career if they talk about it. They're afraid to. Most of them, half of them who are suffering from depression don't get any help for 8 years. They suffer for 8 years and get no treatment whatsoever.
Is that because they choose not to, or they're not aware of it?
I would say probably both. I have the number. I don't know of the exact reasons behind the number. I think that comes out of the Mental Health First Aid Manual, and I'll talk about that. Anecdotally, I believe that it's both. I believe that the information about what treatment options are available are woefully low in corporations, in any workplaces. A lot of workplaces talk a lot about stuff like nutrition and running and trying to get people more active and stuff like that, and don't deal with the largest, number one thing that affects their productivity whatsoever, which are mental health issues. And they don't deal with it at all. Peers help. People with mental health problems are more likely to seek help if someone close to them suggests it. So if you're a manager, you're a colleague, you're a boss, you're working with somebody, they probably see you as much or more than they see their families, their other social groups, things like that. Those people are more likely to get help if you go up and you talk to them about it. Now, there's ways that you have to learn how to talk with them about it, but you will make a difference if you get involved. You will make a difference if you make these suggestions. You will make a difference if you say, these are the things that are available to you. This is how our programs work. These are the things that we have in our benefits. Maybe you don't have benefits, but these are the things that you can do in our area that's going to get you help. You can talk to Mental Health America here. You can talk to these doctors here. These work on a sliding scale, things like that. How many of you who are doing management work or bosses are aware of what mental health coverage you have and what treatment options are available to your employees? So how many of you aren't? Okay, so several. So some of you aren't. I'd really encourage you to do so. And beyond that, just being aware of it, making it something that people are okay with talking about. And I think a big key thing to do, and something I strongly recommend, is that you take a mental health first aid class. I think that in any workplace, at least one person needs to be certified in mental health first aid. This is something that I've taken. It cost me $50 for a day course. I got a workbook. I went through a bunch of exercises and stuff like that. I've been dealing with mental health issues on my own since I was 12 or 13 years old. And I'm 38 now. And I learned a shit ton from this program in one day about how to talk to people, about how to identify issues, how to approach them, how to listen non-judgmentally, what not to do. Like, you don't tell people, I understand. That's like, you really don't want to tell them that, because a lot of people react badly to that. And I would always say that. I always say, oh, I understand what you're going through. And some people will say, hell no, you don't understand what I'm going through. So that'll cut it off. At least one person in your company needs to be certified in this. It is super cheap to do. And I guarantee you it will be used way more than a traditional first aid. Because these issues come up a lot more than somebody, Bob had a heart attack in the office or something like that. Those things are good too. Believe me, if somebody chops their finger off, the keyboard falls on them and it breaks their hand. Those are important things. But I guarantee you this will make way more difference. I guarantee you will use these skills far more often. And you will have a positive impact in multiple people's lives that you are close to if you do this. If just one person in the workplace does this. So really, I don't have a bunch of time here. I really need your help with this. If you thought that something I was saying here was valuable, if you thought that something I was saying here made some sense, talk about this, share it, learn more about it. There's a few links here. opensourcingmentalillnesshelp.org, which is a blog that I started to talk about these kinds of things. Prompt.engineer.com. The prompt thing is something that Engineer is doing to pay for people to travel and talk at conferences about these things. Folks like me and John Dalton, Greg Bogus, Patty Ferran are 4 people who are doing that now with them. And they paid for me to come out here and do this, and I didn't have to say that it was Engineer, but I'm going to, because they are putting their money into something that no one else is really doing right now. To try to raise awareness about this. So if anything I've shown here, any of these URLs or these messages or words, please tweet about it. Please talk about it. Please post it on your Facebook. If you go to osmehelp.org and you go to the talks thing, I have every time I've given this talk, which is about 13 times. This will be, I don't know, number 14, let's say. I have all of them recorded. They're all videoed. You can get the slides for every single one of them. They're all Creative Commons licensed. You can use the slides. You can use that. You can distribute it any way you want to. I'm going to have office hours, and I don't have any official office hours here at OSCON. Some of these speakers do. So I'm going to have office hours at Burgerville. At 3:20 p.m., which I believe is right after a break starts here. So if you're interested in coming and just talking some more about this stuff, that's totally fine. I'm going to be there, and we can talk about that, and I'll get a shake probably or something like that. They made these really good shakes last year I was here, and it was like made from real raspberries. It was awesome. And you can't really see it, but it says on here, under Burgerville, on the map, it says, this is the most Portland thing possible. Eco-conscious burger chain. Cannot get more Portland than that. All right, so anyway, I'm going to go to Burgerville. So thank you for listening. You can go to functron.com/OSMI. That's where all those talks are. osmehelp.org has more stuff about that. Please just keep talking about this stuff. If you have feedback, if you have questions, if you have things where it's like, you know what, I took that mental health first aid stuff, I want to talk about that, because I want that to be something that changes how we do culture in tech, what our workplace culture is like. And that's what I'm trying to do here. So if you're doing something with that, let me know. I want to hear about it. Or if you got questions or you got concerns about anything, personal issues, what have you, just get in contact with me. And thanks. A minute. One person can ask a question, because I will talk. Yeah, please go ahead. You raise your hand first.
Okay, so I did say that I'm aware of what our mental health options are.
Yeah.
Where I work.
Yeah.
And we tell all of our employees about these options, but nobody well, that's going to get on my record somehow.
Yep.
I don't want to go through my employer to deal with this because I still don't want the employer to know about it.
Yep. And yeah, that's tough because I would imagine it's because culturally we feel like we're going to be punished because we have a mental disorder. And we're not punished if we get cancer. We're not punished if we have cardiovascular disease. We're not punished if we break our leg. I mean, we're not thought of as lazy or incompetent. So what I think you have to do is you have to make a cultural change where you start talking openly about it. And I would say, I honestly think that the first thing you can do that makes a difference is really taking that mental health first aid course. I think it's enormously helpful. I think it increases your empathy dramatically, and it gives you real tools for how to interact with people who are having whether it's a crisis situation or not, how to interact with them. I would say, I'm just throwing out ideas. I don't have a great thing here, but I don't think there's, if you can get somebody to come in and talk about this stuff, hell, people could hire me and come in and fly me out. I will talk to your workplace. Or you could talk to somebody like Greg Bogus, or you could talk to somebody like Patty, or John Dalton's in Tasmania, not Tanzania. It's a whole different continent. He's in Tasmania, so it'd be a little tougher to fly him in. But there are also people who are willing to talk about this stuff. And I think that's one of the things I'm trying to do is when I talk about this stuff, so that people feel like maybe it's a little more okay. Like they don't have to be scared because there's other people talking about it too. So I want to keep thinking about that because that's a problem, but it's a big problem. But I would say that actively talking about it and like saying, even if you do it in like a newsletter, say, hey, if you're having a problem, you can talk about this stuff here. No, and promise them that they do not have to interact with anybody. Like they don't have to talk to people at work if they don't want to. They don't have to do that. That there's a trust there. You have to really establish that so that nobody's going to know. And I would just come out and say nobody's going to know if you don't want them to know. One thing I didn't even really mention: substance abuse disorders. Extremely common. I don't know that there's actually a trend in dev, but alcoholism is a substance abuse disorder, and if I look at like what's the list of these are signs for alcoholism, I see most of those at conferences. And we kind of encourage it because we tend to have social interaction at conferences or social events, and they tend to be focused around alcohol. That doesn't mean that that's horrible, but what it means is we have to have an awareness about that. Substance abuse is a mental disorder just like all these other things too. And so we sort of treat substance abuse a little differently because that's sort of a little more accepted. Like, oh, well, you know what, man, at least he's going out and getting help. But it's sort of because we sort of accept it a little more. And I think we do that because we talk about it. Because there's actively in our culture, we talk about it as, well, this is a disease, and whether it's a disease or not, I don't know. But whether it passes some Turing test of disease, I'm not sure. But the point is that we sort of talk more openly about it, and you see ads on TV about those kinds of things, and it's dealt with and stuff like that. I think you have to do that, but you can do that on small scales. You can do that amongst your 5-person team, or your 10-person team, or your 20-person team. You can start talking about this and make people feel that it's okay, that they can trust you, or that they can be trusted, that work group can be trusted, that social place is safe to talk about it. And if you can do that, I think that's huge. So, all right, thank you. That's all I can say right now. Thank you.